Capella University, learning the right skills could make a difference. That's why our business programs teach you relevant skills you can take from the course room to the workplace. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
And away we go, episode 1257 of the Galdi podcast. It is Tuesday, February 10th, 2026. It is the day on which we have media availabilities for Washington Commanders head coach Dan Quinn and the team's new offensive and defensive coordinators. At last, the introductory press conferences for David Blough and Durante Jones. And yes, I did say David Blough. Thank you, LL Cool J. Blough. How you like me now? The schedule for these media availabilities on Tuesday afternoon. Dan Quinn at 1, the new offensive coordinator David Blough at 1:20, and the new defensive coordinator Durante Jones at 1:40. I am very much looking forward to hearing from all three guys. And on Wednesday's show, episode 1258, we'll give you in-depth coverage of what is said. Dan, David, and Durante. 3D. Dan, David, and Durante. Hello and welcome to this Tuesday installment of the Galdi podcast, an installment on which I have not one but two guests for you. Two guests, each named Mark, and each now with a Substack account. How about that? Next segment, we pregame, if you will, for the David Blough intro presser, as we'll speak with our good friend, Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. Mark will give us high-level, all-22 style analysis of what kind of an offense David Blough will run as Commanders offensive coordinator, as we now have enough puzzle pieces to where we could put together at least a decent picture, and hopefully we get more answers during this David Blough intro presser on Tuesday afternoon. And then after a conversation with Mark Bullock, I'll speak with Washington Nationals insider Mark Zuckerman, now of NatsJournal.com, which is a Substack account that he launched on Monday. Mark also is my co-host on the Nats Chat podcast that will talk about NatsJournal.com and preview 2026 Nats spring training, which is getting going. Nats pitchers and catchers on Tuesday are reporting for spring training at Cacti Park of the Palm Beaches in West Palm Beach, Florida. Before we get to feedback, so I, a few moments ago, mentioned puzzle pieces. We now have a big-time puzzle piece in the mystery that has been, what was the deal with the Commanders and Mike Macdonald in the 2024 NFL coaching cycle? How close did the Commanders come to hiring Mike Macdonald instead of Dan Quinn as head coach in the 2024 NFL coaching cycle? And of course, this especially stands out now with Macdonald having led the Seattle Seahawks to a Super Bowl title in just his second season as the team's head coach. Well, here was ESPN NFL insider Adam Schefter on the Pat McAfee Show on Monday afternoon on Mike Macdonald.
First of all, you're talking about a very cerebral guy, really intelligent, really soft-spoken, really quiet, and really a really good guy. And I don't know that there's been a head coach this successful. He's the third youngest coach in history to win a Super Bowl, joining Mike Tomlin and Sean McVay, which is the kind of company that he's now keeping to win that Super Bowl. And when he was coming out, he interviewed in a bunch of places. He interviewed in Carolina. He interviewed in Washington. Seattle was one of his last interviews. And the interesting thing was the Washington Commanders had a high level of interest in hiring him. And his wife, Stephanie, was a cheerleader for the Washington football team. And Stephanie's family is from that area. So you would have thought, no-brainer, wife's from the Washington area, wife worked for the Washington football team, like that's where he's going. And even when he was out in Seattle visiting, the Commanders got him on the phone and made one last ditch effort to try to get him to come back to Washington from Seattle, Washington, where he was visiting. But in the end, the amazing part about it was, to me, he chose to take his wife and move across the country. And Seattle was my very first job out of college. Like, it's a great city. It's a beautiful city. It is a far away city. Like, you can get to Europe quicker than you can get to Seattle. And Mike went there because the main reason was he believed in the general manager, John Schneider.
So how about all of that from Adam Schefter on what could have been Mike Macdonald as Commanders head coach, not Seahawks head coach? And that right there from Schefter did seemingly confirm that Dan Quinn was not the Commanders' first choice or top choice for head coach in that 2024 NFL coaching cycle. That is significant. That matters. Yes, what's done is done, but it is important to know how what is done was done. Per Schefter, the Commanders wanted Mike Macdonald, but he chose the Seahawks over the Commanders. And a big reason for Schefter was Seahawks president of football operations and general manager John Schneider, who is one of the best executives in the NFL and who used to work for the Redskins. He was the Skins vice president of player personnel for the 2001 season. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You could email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Feedback on what I said during the opening segment of Monday's show, episode 1256, and posted on X late night on Sunday night on the Seattle Seahawks' dominant defensive performance in their 29-13 win over the New England Patriots at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, California on Sunday evening in Super Bowl 60, that it was like the Seahawks defense was playing a different sport than our team's defense, the Commanders' defense, played in the 2025 season, and that the need for the Commanders to get better on defense could not be more obvious or urgent. From Chris on X, writes Chris, we're a year away from being a year or two away defensively. Thank you for that, Chris. From Robert Anderson on X, writes Robert, Adam Peters wants to get younger and faster, so the first order of business is to extend Bobby Wagner. Thank you for that, Robert. From Darren Painter on X, writes Darren, the Seahawks blitzed their cornerbacks. What a concept. Thank you for that, Darren. From Hang It in the Louvu on X, writes Hang It in the Louvu. How about all of those corner blitzes? Thank you for that. Hang It in the Louvu. From Steve on X, writes Steve, Christian Gonzalez shined for New England. The Pats got him one pick after we took Forbes. Thank you for that, Steve. Yeah, I am well aware of that. The Commanders, with the number 16 overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, took cornerback Emmanuel Forbes Jr. out of Mississippi State. The Patriots, with the number 17 overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, took cornerback Christian Gonzalez out of the University of Oregon. The Commanders released Forbes in November 2024, and Gonzalez now is one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL, was tremendous in Super Bowl 60, 3 pass defenses, and playing on 96% of the Patriots' defensive snaps. From Steve, from Connecticut on X, writes Steve, we haven't had a defense close to that since 1991. Thank you for that, Steve. Very true. Sad, but very true. Now, there have been some good Washington defenses since the all-time great 1991 Redskins defense, 2004, 2005, 2007, 2017, 2020, 2022, but there have not been many good Washington defenses since that all-time great 1991 Redskins defense. Email from Dave on the Commanders' new logo. Writes Dave, hi, Al. I am thrilled with what appears to be the new logo with the circular shield and spears. I think this is so smart. Not only does the logo add to the spear iconography, but the logo gets back to the circular logo style that is much more reminiscent of the old logo. I hope this becomes the helmet logo, and we go back to throwback jerseys as soon as possible. Thank you for the email, Dave. And as I am sure many of you noticed, The Commanders late night on Sunday night, shortly after the end of Super Bowl 60, put up a post on X with the message, quote, "Turn the page, hashtag raise hail," end quote. The post contained a drawing of Commanders players getting ready to come out from their tunnel onto the field at Northwest Stadium. The players in the drawing are wearing not the Commanders' primary uniform, but the team's Redskins-like alternate uniform, and yet another sign that that uniform is about to become the team's primary uniform. And at the top of the drawing, beneath 2026, is this new logo that we first saw on February 2nd, a new Commanders logo featuring the W in a circle with two spears going through the circle as the motif of the spear continues. I'm a big fan of the Redskins-like alternate uniform becoming the team's number one uniform, and I do like this new logo of a W in a circle with two spears going through the circle. And you know what else I like? That the team isn't announcing or making a big deal of this rebrand. The team is just doing the rebrand. Off the debacle that was 2.2.22, there's no need for more pomp and circumstance. Just do what you're going to do, you know? And the team is doing that. And I believe that more, maybe a lot more, is coming. Stay tuned. Well, what the Commanders are doing, hopefully, will deliver long-term success. Short-term thinking does not deliver long-term results. Good process does. Science does, especially when it comes to skincare. And the best product for skincare is OneSkin. OneSkin formulas are powered by the OS1 peptide, a patented peptide built on longevity science proven to target aging at the cellular level. OneSkin supports the cellular repair that keeps your skin looking and feeling better as you get older. This is not about adding extra steps to your routine. No, this is about swapping in smarter ones. Born from over 10 years of longevity research, OneSkin's OS1 peptide is proven to target the cells that cause the visible signs of aging, helping you unlock your healthiest skin now and as you age. And for a limited time, OneSkin is making it even easier to stay consistent with up to 30% off your first 3 subscription orders when you use the promo code GALDI at oneskin.co/GALDI. That's oneskin.co/GALDI and use the promo code GALDI, oneskin.co/GALDI, up to 30% off with the promo code GALDI. And after your purchase, you'll be asked where you heard about OneSkin. Please support our show and say that Al Galdi sent you.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Ever feel like planning a trip is almost as fun as taking it? Hotel comparisons, restaurant reservations, a perfectly timed itinerary. What if your love of planning travel could actually become a source of income? As a Fora advisor, it can. Fora is a modern travel agency built for people who love to plan travel and help others travel well. With best-in-class training, powerful booking tech, and a vibrant global community of experts sharing real insider knowledge, you can confidently build your own travel business on your terms from anywhere. Every hotel, cruise, and experience you book earns you commission. And with access to more than 7,000 preferred travel partners from iconic brands to boutique gems, you'll unlock VIP perks like upgrades, resort credits, and late checkout. The kind of elevated travel experiences most travelers never get. Now's the time to turn your passion for travel into a fulfilling business with Fora. Become a Fora advisor today at foratravel.com/advisor. That's FORA travel.com/advisor.
The changes for the Washington Commanders offensive coaching staff this offseason, at least so far, are as follows. So the Commanders on January 6th parted with offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury and offensive line coach Bobby Johnson. The Commanders on January 10th announced having promoted assistant quarterbacks coach David Blough to offensive coordinator. We on January 14th had reports that the Commanders were hiring Atlanta Falcons quarterbacks coach DJ Williams as Commanders quarterbacks coach. We on January 16th had reports that the Commanders were hiring Danny Etling as their assistant quarterbacks coach. And we on January 19th had reports that the Commanders were promoting assistant offensive line coach Darnell Stapleton to offensive line coach, and were promoting offensive quality control coach Shane Tobe to assistant offensive line coach. And so, as we on Tuesday afternoon have the introductory press conference for David Blough as Commanders offensive coordinator, do we now have a better understanding of what his offense will be? It is a pleasure to welcome back to the Galdi podcast Commanders analyst Mark Bullock. Mark is exceptional at talking Commanders from an X's and O's standpoint. He does tremendous Commanders All-22 breakdowns. You can read his work on his Substack, Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. He has written for The Athletic and for The Washington Post. He also is a Commanders fan. You can follow Mark on X at Mark Bullock NFL. So, Mark, you recently have written some really good pieces regarding what the Commanders offense with David Blough as offensive coordinator might be. January 10th, headline quote, Commanders promote David Blough to offensive coordinator, end quote. January 12th, headline quote, trick plays show David Blough's creativity and potential, end quote. January 14th, headline quote, lessons David Blough can learn from Ben Johnson's Bears offense, end quote. January 20th, headline quote, Commanders promote Darnell Stapleton to offensive line coach, end quote. Right now, what is your best guess as to what the Commanders' offense with David Blough as offensive coordinator will be?
Yeah, so the thing with Stapleton is when he was the offensive line coach in Florida before he came to Washington, when he was in college with Florida, they were almost exclusively a zone-based run scheme. Now, obviously, Washington have used zone schemes, sure, but they under Kingsbury and Bobby Johnson, they were primarily more of a gap-based team where they used the counters and the powers and pulling guys each and every way. So that was more their forte, whereas Stapleton has been more of a zone scheme guy. And when you look at David Blough's big influences would be Ben Johnson and Kevin O'Connell. Those guys both use quite a diverse run scheme. But when you look at how Ben Johnson's kind of gone into Chicago in year one, and you compare that to what Ben Johnson's Lions offense in his last year in Detroit was extremely diverse with run schemes. They ran just about every type of scheme, and they layered it brilliantly. But that was like year 3 or year 4 of the Ben Johnson offense. When he went into Chicago, it was year 1, and you can very easily, overwhelm your new unit with too much scheme and too much doing too much with. You've got formations, personnel, motions, schemes. If you throw all of that all at once, the offense is just going to sink. So what Ben Johnson did really well with Chicago and with Caleb Williams was they threw a lot of formations and a lot of motions at them so that they could get into a lot of different looks and motion guys over to help disguise things. But they kept the scheme and the personnel groups very simple. So they basically operated out of 12 personnel early in the year, which is 2 tight ends, 1 running back, 2 receivers. And they basically relied not purely, but almost exclusively on zone runs rather than all the gap stuff that he did in Detroit. So he pared that down, and he kept the formations and motions high, but he pared down the different types of schemes and the different personnel groups to keep it simpler for the offense to not get overwhelmed. And I think when you look at what Washington's going to do with David Blough obviously being heavily influenced by Ben Johnson, and now they've brought in Stapleton, or promoted Stapleton, who primarily was a zone guy in Florida, at his previous stop at Florida, you can see that potentially the blueprint is there for them to follow, where they bring in a lot more motion and formations to help window dress what they're trying to do, but they're still going to be trying to do primarily zone runs, probably from a limited amount of personnel groups early in the year. And you saw that was how Ben Johnson did things for Caleb Williams to get Williams and that Bears offense comfortable. And then once they progressed through the year and got more comfortable, by sort of week 12 and week 13, they were starting to build into that and use more personnel groups. They shifted a little bit more from a 12 personnel team to an 11 personnel team, and got another receiver on the field. And they started working some more shotgun stuff and more passing game stuff, but they were primarily still zone run schemes. So it was building it up slowly, step by step, rather than just jumping into throwing everything at them. So I think that's possibly the blueprint we're seeing here in Washington that Blough and Stapleton are likely to try to follow. Obviously, we don't know for certain what's going on in there, but that if we're reading the clues, I think that's probably the way they're going to go.
David Blough, during his career as an NFL quarterback, was on the Detroit Lions practice squad during the 2023 season, working with then Lions offensive coordinator and current Chicago Bears head coach Ben Johnson. So bottom line, a Ben Johnson style offense is what you're anticipating for the Commanders with David Blough as offensive coordinator.
Yeah, well, the Ben Johnson offense is a lot more diverse than what I think we're going to get. It's the year one Chicago Ben Johnson, where it was still like they didn't have the counters and the traps and the power schemes and all of that. It was mostly zone and duo. Occasionally you'd see a counter or a power scheme, but it was mostly zone schemes and occasionally duos and that kind of thing. So I think it's going to be a stripped back version of that to at least get their kind of feet under the table and be like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is our identity. And then we can build off of that going forward. So I think maybe when you watch it, it might resemble more of what we remember a Kyle Shanahan or Mike Shanahan offense to be, where it was that kind of zone-based scheme, play action off of that, bootlegs off of that. I think that probably might be what it might feel more like, but that Ben Johnson's offense in Detroit very much felt like a Shanahan system, but with more gap scheme stuff. So yeah, that's kind of how I think it's going to feel.
So we had talked about whether the Commanders were about to have a Shanahan-style offense. Maybe not exactly, but getting closer.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where, certainly when you look at the background of these coaches that they've promoted, Stapleton has been a zone scheme guy, and that's what he taught at Florida, and that's what they ran at Florida. And that Blough obviously, did plenty of zone scheme stuff in his various stops with KOC and Ben Johnson. But he obviously had more stuff with Kingsbury and Ben Johnson as well. So I think the future, they want to get to that kind of diverse Ben Johnson stuff. But I think to get to that level, you have to lay a foundation first. And that foundation, it's much easier to start with. We're just going to run zone and use that as our foundation. And then later in the season, we can start diversifying a little bit more once we're comfortable with what we're doing.
We're talking with Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. One of the funny things to me about the changes with the Commanders' offensive coaching staff this offseason is Dan Quinn disliked the offense enough to part with Cliff Kingsbury and Bobby Johnson, but liked the offense enough to promote David Blough, Darnell Stapleton, and Shane Tobe. And I'm not saying that any of this is wrong, as there is a lot here that we don't know, but this is an unusual offensive coaching staff revamp.
Yeah, for sure. It is definitely a very unique situation. You don't see them. Usually if you see, a coordinator fired and a guy promoted from within, it's because there's been a fallout between the coach and the coordinator, and both sides seem to be putting out the message that there was no real fallout. It was just a difference in philosophy, which, I guess can happen. It's just odd that the guys that are within the building being promoted are going to have that different philosophy when they've been on the staff with a philosophy that you don't agree with anymore. But yeah, when you get the context of, Blough worked under different coordinators and Stapleton ran different systems before he came here, then that a big part of what Dan Quinn did when he put this offensive staff together, he brought in guys with different backgrounds that hadn't worked together before. And I thought Cliff deserved credit for being able to pluck ideas from those guys and not have an ego of being like, this is my offense, we're going to run it this way. We saw him adapt what his offense was in Arizona to what it was here, and there were elements of those different coaches that you could see. You could see some of the play action stuff that Anthony Lynn probably had a big influence in. You could see some of the run game stuff that Bobby Johnson had an influence in. You could see the trick plays that David Blough probably had the influence with. So you could see that Kingsbury was mixing together all those different parts, but they were still different parts with all different philosophies. And so I guess when you move on from some of those different philosophies, you can kind of refine that, okay, we actually, the philosophies that we actually want are with what these guys, or are aligned with what these guys want. So we'll see if it pays off, because it's a very unique situation. And I don't think there's many teams that have done this kind of thing before, which doesn't mean it can't work out, but it is somewhat unprecedented. So we'll see how it goes.
I know that you, like me, were very interested in the Commanders hiring Mike Macdonald as offensive coordinator. The Miami Dolphins on January 8th announced the firing of Macdonald as head coach. The Commanders 2 days later, January 10th, announced having promoted David Blough to offensive coordinator, and it was not until January 26th that the Los Angeles Chargers announced the hiring of Macdonald as offensive coordinator. So he did not get/take another head coaching job. He did get an offensive coordinator job. My take on this is, yes, it would have been great for the Commanders to have gotten Mike Macdonald as their offensive coordinator, but also, yes, Macdonald took a long time to figure out what he was doing, and the well-regarded David Blough could have/would have been long gone by the time that Macdonald decided what he was doing, with zero guarantee that what he would be doing would be joining the Commanders. But now that we know what happened and when it happened, where do you stand on the Commanders not having waited for Macdonald?
I would have waited for Mike Macdonald, but I can only assume that Dan Quinn made a phone call offer on the record with Mike Macdonald and said, hey, what is your interest in this? And you know, would you be willing to do this quickly, because our number two option is going to leave it quickly? Well, potentially. I don't know if David Blough would have left quickly. I would have potentially called the bluff on that, because, you know, Detroit wanted to interview Mike Macdonald as well, and Detroit wanted to interview a number of different guys, and they've only just made their hire, right? So I would Detroit have rushed and hired Blough? Maybe, but you'd been left with either a Mike Macdonald, or, you know, you could go and hire someone from Kyle Shanahan's staff, or, you know, Sean McVay's staff, or Kevin O'Connell's staff, or whatever. You could have gone and found another Shanahan tree guy to run that kind of system if that's what you want to run. I don't think you needed to rush into David Blough. That doesn't mean I don't think David Blough can be successful. I think he's got an uphill battle with a lot more challenges than people realize, but you know, I don't think it's impossible for him to do well, but I would have certainly waited. I think Mike Macdonald is one of the better offensive play callers in the league. So when you have the opportunity to get that guy and pair him up with Jaden Daniels, I probably would have waited for it. But, you know, maybe Quinn saw that as a potential threat down the line, that you pair up Mike Macdonald with Jaden Daniels, then suddenly a year or two time, Mike Macdonald is getting head coaching jobs, and maybe Adam Peters goes, you know, I want to keep that pairing, and Dan Quinn is in trouble. So, you know, I don't know. That's all speculation, but I probably would have waited for Mike Macdonald personally.
What's funny is that if David Blough is who he is being built up to be, then he could be gone for a head coaching job in a season or two. NFL coaching cycles now move quickly. If Blough is the next great NFL offensive coordinator, then he won't have like a 5-year run as Commanders offensive coordinator. It'll be more like a 1 or 2 year run.
Yeah, I would imagine I'd be surprised if it's a one and done for Blough, given that he's so inexperienced. Like, even though Sean McVay was hired at 30, like, he at least had coordinated offenses for a couple of years, and he'd been in coaching for 6 or 7 years by that point. David Blough's been in coaching as an assistant coach for 2 years, and now is going to run an offensive coordinator for 1. So I don't think he'll get promoted next year, but certainly he could be, you know, two or 3 years down the line, he could be getting hired away pretty quickly. And yeah, it's definitely a risk. 100%, it's a risk. And yeah, we'll see how it plays out, I guess.
Yes, we will. Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. Mark, thanks, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, of course. Talk soon.
All right. Hey, if you are planning a wedding or you know someone who is, check out or have that person check out cateringbyuptown.com. Catering by Uptown delivers not just delicious food of the highest quality, but also a flawless and memorable experience tailored to your special day. Catering by Uptown's team is dedicated to meeting your every need with elegance and precision. If you visit cateringbyuptown.com and click on venues, you can set up your own personal tour of one of Catering by Uptown's premier venues, including outstanding waterfront venues. Also, Catering by Uptown is great for parties, so whether a birthday, an anniversary, a retirement, or a charity gala. Catering by Uptown understands that special events deserve to be celebrated in style. Catering by Uptown takes care of every detail so that you can enjoy your event. Catering by Uptown is a family business. It is run by the Pereiras, so they are great Commanders fans and loyal supporters of this podcast. Visit cateringbyuptown.com and make sure that you mention that Al Galdi sent you. That's cateringbyuptown.com and make sure that you mention that Al Galdi sent you. Well, believe it or not, MLB spring training camps are beginning. Washington Nationals pitchers and catchers on Tuesday are reporting for spring training at Cacti Park of the Palm Beaches in West Palm Beach, Florida. Baltimore Orioles pitchers and catchers on Tuesday are reporting for spring training at Ed Smith Stadium in Sarasota, Florida. Regarding the Nats, so quite the last 7 months for the Nats. Managing principal owner Mark Lerner, he this past July 6th announced having fired president of baseball operations and general manager Mike Rizzo and having fired manager Davey Martinez. The Nats on October 1st announced the hiring of Paul Taboni as president of baseball operations. The Nats on October 31st, Halloween, announced the hiring of Blake Butera as manager. The Nats on December 18th announced the hiring of Anirudh Colombi as general manager. These guys and so many others hired by the Nats in their much-needed revamping of baseball operations are young, are in their 30s, and are big on analytics and sports science. I am very excited about the Nats going in on analytics and sports science like never before, but there's no doubt that what Paul Taboni is doing is essentially restarting a rebuild off it having failed. The Nats in the 2025-2026 offseason have done very little in terms of significant player acquisitions and have traded away multiple key guys. The Nats on December 6th announced having traded lefty reliever Jose A. Ferrer to the Seattle Mariners for two prospects, catcher Harry Ford and right-handed pitcher Isaac Lyon. The Nats on January 22nd announced having traded starting pitcher Mackenzie Gore to the Texas Rangers for five prospects, and the only notable free agent signing by the Nats since the end of the 2025 season has been the team on December 22nd announcing having signed free agent left-handed starting pitcher Foster Griffin to a one-year contract. The Nats, since winning the 2019 World Series, have had 6 consecutive losing regular seasons, 2020 through 2025. I applaud what Paul Taboni is doing, but I absolutely understand Nats fans having what I call rebuild fatigue. It is a pleasure to welcome to the Al Galdi podcast Nats insider Mark Zuckerman of a new venture, NatsJournal.com, which is a Substack account that launched on Monday and is outstanding. An absolute must-read if you're a Nats fan. Mark has covered the Nats since the franchise moved to Washington, D.C. in the 2004-2005 offseason. He spent the last 10 years, the 2016 through 2025 seasons, covering the Nats for MASNsports.com. But the Nats are no longer tied to MASN. The Nats on January 14th announced the launch of Nationals.TV, marking the end of their 21-season run with MASN. And Mark and I continued to host the Nats Chat podcast. We've been doing that since 2021. We're entering season number 6 of the podcast. And so Mark now is on this podcast. I feel like I'm inviting Mark into my house. I hope the living room is clean. You can follow Mark on X at Mark Zuckerman. Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm great, Al. I've seen this same view of you from your basement where I don't really get a lot of sense of what's going on behind you. So I don't feel like this is all that different than what we do every single night during the season. But thank you for welcoming me onto your podcast, because this is a rare treat and maybe reach a little different audience than we get throughout the baseball season normally.
Well, it's very nice to have you on this podcast. Congratulations on NatsJournal.com. It's fantastic. I think that it's going to do so well. It already is doing so well. What is the mission of NatsJournal.com?
Well, the mission is to do what, unfortunately, there just aren't that many outlets left that are doing, and that's covering this team on a true daily basis in a journalistic way, with access to the clubhouse, to the players, the manager, the front office. I am, going to be there for the first couple weeks of spring training, probably going back for the last portion of camp as well, carrying this into the regular season, making, not all the road trips, but the plan is to do a majority of the trips. So it's basically the same thing that I've done all these years for previous outlets. I'm just going to be doing it independently on my own for this site. And it's not necessarily the position that any of us think we want to get ourselves into, but when you look at the industry, and we've seen what just happened at the Washington Post, we saw obviously what happened with Masson, but we've seen it elsewhere, and you've seen it in the radio industry. More and more media are moving to independent avenues to cover whatever it is that they cover. And I tried this way back in 2010. I kind of didn't know what I was doing. The world wasn't really set up for this yet. 16 years later, I do feel like everyone has gotten used to this concept of following individual people, talk show hosts, reporters, and paying for a subscription, and still able to provide everyone the kind of coverage that I've always provided, just in a different form in which I'm the boss and the editor and the writer and the webmaster and all of that all tied into one.
I love that at NatsJournal.com, you have posted side-by-side photos of you preparing to leave for Nats spring training in 2010 when you were launching NatsInsider.com, and now in 2026 as you're launching NatsJournal.com. And that's the thing. What you're doing now in launching NatsJournal.com, you did 16 years ago in launching NatsInsider.com. So you are in no way new to new media. You are an OG of new media, and NatsInsider.com in 2010 worked.
It did. And again, this is 16 years ago. There wasn't really a roadmap for this. That was after the first time I was laid off. That was the Washington Times when they killed their entire sports section. Does that sound familiar? A DC newspaper deciding to kill off its sports section and actually regretting that decision because a year later they tried to bring it back and it didn't exactly work out so well. It's funny how these things repeat themselves. So I was unemployed, trying to figure out what to do. And at that time, it was just, in my mind, trying to keep myself afloat. And trying to keep covering the team, and hopefully that would lead to another full-time job with an established outlet. And what happened was there was such a good response to it right away that I realized I could get my readers to fund my trip to spring training and then see how that went from there. And they not only funded me for that, for the trip to Vieira, but then well into the regular season and continued. In the entire year, I worked independently on my own, and it covered my expenses. It was a wonderful experience. I've always since then in my mind wondered, could I ever try to do something like that again? The drawbacks were it still wasn't full-time work. It was still a lot of work on my end because there was no roadmap for how to do this. I mean, I was essentially asking for donations back then. Nowadays, with sites like Substack and other platforms, it's all set up for subscriptions. You can get a monthly subscription. You can get an annual subscription. So it's much better designed for it. And frankly, the general population, I think, has gotten a lot more used to consuming their news in this kind of way. So as great as that was and as successful as that was, I couldn't turn down the chance to take a full-time job a year later at what was then known as Comcast Sportsnet, was there for 5 years and then wound up at Masson. But I feel like the media landscape has changed so much since then that I hope what I'm trying to do now and what other people like yourself are doing, that this is a sustainable model that can work not just in the short term, but in the long term as well.
I've thought about this a lot, but while yes, things in sports media now are very different as compared to just 5 years ago, never mind 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'm not convinced that things for the consumer now are worse. I very much believe that things for the consumer now, in a lot of ways, are better. Like, to me, podcasts are so much better for the consumer than radio shows. And I think that a Substack by you and run by you may well be the best version of you. Nats fans are going to get so much good content from you on NatsJournal.com.
What I love about this is, I'm reporting for the fans out there. I'm not taking orders from an editor or somebody even higher up than that has specific things they want or things you can do or can't do. I can really decide how I want to do this. But more than that, I can take my cues from the actual readers, from the fans. And that's something I'm very much looking forward to in this, is getting their feedback and finding out what kind of articles are they most interested in? Which ones are they not as much interested in? Maybe there's a style of writing or a volume of writing that they prefer. And I will be figuring this out along the way, along with them. But it's a very refreshing way to do it. I have no constraints. I don't have to write certain articles at certain times in certain ways like maybe I did in the past. And just going back to when I did try this previously at Nats Insider, that to me was invigorating as a writer and as a reporter, to have that freedom to say, I'm going to do it this way, I'm going to do it that way. I remember there was even a specific day down there in spring training that year in 2010 where I got a message from one of my subscribers, one of my readers. They said, hey, I'd love to see an article about this. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was a specific thing. And by the next day, I had that article published. And to be able to respond to readers like that and give them exactly what they want, you just aren't going to get that in a traditional media outlet. So that part of it, to me, is very exciting. And I'm really invigorated at the possibilities here.
Outstanding. So again, Mark's new site is natsjournal.com, and at the top of the page is a link to a page for the podcast that we do, Nats Chat, a podcast for which there is a new episode for the morning after every Nats regular season game and postseason game whenever we get to that point. And during Nats spring training, we'll be doing periodic episodes of Nats Chat. Much more with Mark Zuckerman in moments, but when it comes to Nats Chat and when it comes to this podcast, the Galdi podcast, please consider subscribing. If you're not already doing that, subscribing costs nothing. Make sure that you never miss an episode and helps out the podcast a lot. And if you are already subscribing, thank you. More now with Nats insider Mark Zuckerman of a new venture, natsjournal.com. So let's talk Nats as their spring training is getting going. First Nats spring training without Davey Martinez as manager since 2017. First Nats spring training without Mike Rizzo running Nats baseball operations since 2008. I'd ask you what the biggest storyline at 2026 Nats spring training is, but I feel like the answer is obvious. Everything, because so much is new and unknown.
Right. For better or worse, we knew how this went in the past because they had so much consistency at the top of the organization. And so you had a sense of what was going to happen, aside from the occasional camel that might show up at spring training. I don't think we're going to have that, but you never know what Blake Butera has up his sleeve this year. I am fascinated to see this. I think there are parts of it that will look similar because there are things that every team does to prep for a season. But I do think there are going to be some differences. You have a very young front office. The president of baseball operations, Paul Taboni, is 35. You have a manager and coaching staff that's incredibly young. Blake Butera is 33. A lot of his staffers are his age or even younger. A lot of these guys have zero big league experience. And so how's that going to translate on the field? I feel like there are going to be different methods that they have for all this. But I'm also fascinated to see, how do the players, and I know it's a lot of young players that don't have a lot of experience to begin with, but how do they respond to this new group? Yeah, they might relate to them a little better because they're so young, but they may also look at them and say, why am I listening to what you have to say? You never even came close to playing or coaching in the big leagues. I do think that's a challenge for Butera and his staff, but I am truly fascinated to see what this looks like and how this all shakes out over the next 6 weeks. I think it's going to be different in a lot of ways, and then the proof will be in the pudding. Once the season starts, what does that turn into results-wise?
When you think about the Nats starting rotation for the start of the 2026 regular season, the candidates would seem to be Josiah Gray, Cade Cavalli, Foster Griffin, Brad Lord, Jake Irvin, Trevor Williams, Mitchell Parker, and DJ Hers. But there are plenty of other possibilities. How many spots in the rotation do you believe are up for grabs in spring training?
It's a great question. I think the real thing to consider here is there one sure thing out of the entire group? And I'm not sure that there is. I mean, yes, Cade Cavalli is probably leading the way. He's the most promising of the young arms. He, by all accounts, is finally healthy. We got a glimpse of him late last season. They signed the one major league free agent they've signed so far is a guy named Foster Griffin. He got a 1-year, $5.5 million deal. He only has a handful of games of big league experience, but he pitched the last 3 seasons in Japan and was one of the best pitchers in that country, in that league. So I would imagine he's guaranteed a spot. Beyond that, Josiah Gray trying to come back from basically 2 years off. By all accounts, he's supposed to be healthy. I think, if he's good to go, he's part of it. Jake Irvin, despite a really rough year last year, all the signs I get is that he's a part of that rotation. I think there's a major question with Brad Lord. Is he a starter? Is he a reliever? How does he fit into that? And then there's a lot of others beyond that could find their way in or not. And so I guess I'm going to say there's maybe 3 spots that are kind of locked up in Cavalli, Griffin, and Irvin. And beyond that, maybe there's some question marks, but I don't know. I think that's one of the big things that we have to find out is what exactly is their vision for these guys. And maybe, because I know this is a big Al Galdi thing, maybe this staff is actually viewing their pitching plan in a very different way than we've seen here traditionally. Maybe you have starters, but maybe they aren't designed to go as long. And maybe you have relievers who piggyback them and give them multiple innings, or God forbid, maybe we'll even see an opener at some point. I can only imagine what your reaction is going to be if and when that day comes.
You know me well. You know how much I would love for the Nats to do as you just described. In terms of position players, how many starting spots do you view as being up for grabs in spring training?
I think I'm looking at it as essentially 2 spots. The catching position, I think, is the most fascinating one. They acquired Harry Ford, top catching prospect from the Mariners. They still have Keibert Ruiz, the only guy in the entire organization on a long-term contract. Do they say they're going to share the job? Do they envision Ford being the number 1 guy? Are they still giving Ruiz the opportunity to right his ship and say, hey, you're a little more established, you can still be the guy? So I want to see how that plays out. First base to me is totally wide open. I thought they would sign somebody with some experience, and instead they didn't. There's like 3, 4, even 5 guys between big league deals and minor league deals who could all share that job in some way. And then there's also that question of would they move guys around to different positions? So like Luis Garcia, who's been a second baseman for several years, there's been the idea floated around that he could move to first base. Well, if he goes there, then maybe that solves that position, but now second base becomes open. So I think one of those 2 is probably up for grabs in some way, but I think most everything else is fairly set. And I would imagine because you have 4 kind of regular outfielders that you're going to see a rotation there with 3 playing the field and one of them DHing. But I think that could change, as this all plays out. I think we may see less so than in the past, where they're more willing to mix and match and give guys day off or put this guy in the lineup or use it more of a platoon lineup certain days. It may not be as clear cut. These are the 9 regulars who play every day. It may be more like 12 or 13 who mix and match depending on matchups.
We went into the 2025-2026 offseason anticipating 2 potential major trades by the Nats, those of starting pitcher Mackenzie Gore and shortstop C.J. Abrams, given each guy's talent and where each guy is at contractually. The Nats have traded Gore, that they have not yet traded Abrams. Does that say to you that it now is unlikely that the Nats trade him before the start of the regular season, or should we remain on C.J. Abrams' trade watch?
I'm going to say unlikely because I'm not sure what changes between now and opening day unless a team had an injury or a sudden need. I've got to believe that anybody who was interested in him has made their offer to Paul Taboni, and it wasn't enough for his liking. So why would they up that offer now? I think Taboni views it as this. Here's a kid who we know when he's on, he's as good as anybody in the game. He was an all-star 2 years ago. He was good enough to be an all-star last year. And then the second half of the season, in both cases, he kind of fell off a cliff. Worst case scenario, if they view this as he can come in, get off to a good start, play well again in the first half, they could then look to trade him again in July when there are more specific needs for teams and when his value may be higher. Right now, his value is probably lower than it would have been otherwise. So I think he's probably the guy on opening day. I don't necessarily know that he's going to be the guy come the end of the season, because if he does play well, and given just what it seems like the direction of this team is, unless they were to lock him up long term, I could see them looking at offers again come July.
Regarding the new process for the Nats, them being in on analytics and sports science like never before, do you think that we'll see signs of that during spring training, or is this more of a behind-the-scenes thing?
I'm guessing it's more behind the scenes. And, they've had some of these various, cameras and setups and things like on the fields. And when you watch guys throw in the bullpen, you've got a coach behind him with an iPad that says, okay, your vertical break was this and your arm angle was this. So like they've had that information and they've been using it. I think there is more, obviously, that they're adding to the equation. But I'm guessing that's the kind of stuff we're not going to see as much with our own eyes, and more the things they're going to be working on behind the scenes before they ever take the field, and especially after as they evaluate. And what it really is, you can have all the information in the world. That's great. It's how do you digest it? How do you convey to the players what you're seeing and what they can then implement into the games? And so that's really where all the work comes in off the field. They have a lot more staff, I think, that are going to be working on these kinds of things. And it's going to be hard to make that like a tangible thing where we really say, yes, that's evidence of this working or not working. It's probably the kind of thing that you're going to look up at the end of the year and say, okay, this guy really improved in this area because he was doing this differently or that differently. And there may have been some science behind that led to that improvement.
Final question. You know as well as I do that there is an anger among Nats fans, a justified anger with the failed rebuild under Mike Rizzo and the lack of spending by the Lerner ownership group, and this rebuild fatigue of 6 consecutive losing regular seasons. How would you describe the state of Nats fandom right now?
It's frustrated, and they have every right to be frustrated. I think you agree with this. Nats fans are generally a very patient group. And as hard as 2021 with the trade deadline, and certainly 2022 when they dealt Soto, as hard as that all was, I think most fans understood what was going on and bought into the idea of, okay, that run is over. The organization was not positioned to continue that success any longer. It's time to start over, but it's going to take a couple of years, and then you expect those results to actually show up on the field. That's what made last year so disappointing. There was real optimism that things might be better. We might finally see a team on the field in 2025 that was more competitive and on the right track to winning. And instead, they never came close to that. And the end result was that they fired the manager and the GM in July. So the question we all had when Paul Taboni and his new group took over was, are you continuing or are you finishing what that previous group started? Or are you starting all over yourself, which means this is going to be a longer term process? Well, while they haven't maybe come right out and said it in no uncertain terms, the actions speak louder than words in this case. Trading Gore, basically being inactive on the free agent market this winter, suggests that they are starting over and that they're not looking at this year, maybe not even next year. They may be looking several years down the road before they intend to contend. So if you're a fan of this team, that's incredibly frustrating. You've been through the losing now. You just want a winner again. I get it. I think Paul Taboni deep down gets it. But his answer to that is essentially, look, I was brought in here to do a job. What I saw was not a team that I believed is on the verge of competing again. I have to build this in my mode, my model of what I believe can work. And I can't be blamed for whatever happened before I got here. He's not wrong about any of that. I think he's trying to be as upfront as he can with the fan base, but the frustration 100% is valid. What you would hope they get out of this season, more than wins and losses. I mean, sure, many wins would be great, but what you really hope is that that core group of young players looks like they are legit, looks like they're going to be a part of this thing in the long term, and even a few more kind of get added to that group so that you can say, and you also hope that maybe some guys who you don't think of as part of the core group show improvement, maybe as a result of the coaching and the front office, some different methods. And so at the end of this year, you might say to yourself, okay, they're on the right track finally. It's time for ownership to step in and start spending money to supplement that all. Again, something we all wonder, will it happen, if and when? That's kind of your best case scenario. But in the meantime, the frustration is valid, 100%. It's hard to ask fans who've already accepted a rebuild for the last 4 to 5 years to say, hey, stick with us. We're kind of going through this again.
For sure. Mark and I did have the pleasure of speaking with Paul Taboni on a recent episode of the Nats Chat podcast. He was really good. I would highly encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. Nats Insider, Mark Zuckerman of a new venture, natsjournal.com. Mark, good to talk to you, and I'll be talking with you on Nats Chat in the coming days.
I can't wait for it, Al. Thank you so much for sharing a little part of your own personal world with me here on the Al Galdi podcast.
And that'll do it for you and me for now. Keep the feedback coming. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You can email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Wednesday show, episode 1258, will include a lot for you on the Washington Commanders as we on Tuesday afternoon have media availabilities for head coach Dan Quinn and the team's new offensive and defensive coordinators. Dan Quinn at 1, the new offensive coordinator David Blough at 1:20, and the new defensive coordinator Durante Jones at 1:40. Also on Wednesday's show, I'll talk college basketball. Number 15 Virginia is at Florida State Tuesday night at 7. George Mason is at Richmond Tuesday night at 7. And George Washington is home to Rhode Island Tuesday night at 7. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.